My name is Robin Pollack, and I have been a Master Gardener with North Fulton Master Gardeners since 2005. I'm excited to be here today to tell and show you all you'll need to know to grow a successful summer garden. If you have any questions during my class today, please write your questions into the Q&A. I will try and answer as many of them as we can at the end of the demo. You received the vegetable planting chart and a home vegetable gardening reference in the reminder email, and you will get a follow-up email with these references. Additionally, if anybody wants to see my vegetable garden in full bloom in the middle of the summer, you can view it too in the video link you were sent from last summer's class. The spring vegetable gardening kit link from February was also sent to you as a resource when you registered for today's class. The question and answer period will be at the end. So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I have gardened since I was a child, following my parents around their garden in England. And I am a former art teacher of 35 years and love to garden, but I use principles of art such as color, texture, and shape, which look great, but didn't always work. Once I learned the science of gardening as a master gardener, did the real fun and knowledge begin. Today, we will learn how to plant, care for, and harvest a bounty of veggies throughout the spring and summer in your own garden. Today, I'm going to plant in a 4x4 foot area or 16 square feet. And you can plant 1, 2, whether it's in the ground, in raised beds, or in pots on your patio. Planted wisely, the amount of space will feed a family of 4 all summer long with plenty to share. Many different plants can be grown in a 16 square foot area. You could grow a few large plants like floor blueberry bushes, or you could grow 25 strawberry plants in a 4x4 foot space, or an entire garden of everything your family likes to eat. Now more than ever, growing your own food is as important as the victory garden was during World War times and food was scarce. Then communities banded together and grew over 20 million private vegetable gardens. That produced half of the nation's food supply during difficult times. These gardens consisted of vegetables, berries, herbs, fruits, and anything their family liked to eat. Planting a garden will give you and your family some healthy food options and enough to share. Gardening also has a lot of health and mental benefits, like giving us a sense of self-worth, lowering your blood pressure, reducing stress and anxiety, and connecting with nature and the outdoors, which always makes you feel better in general. Also, involving picky eaters in the process of growing gets them invested, and it may not make them as picky as they would have been. Today, we are going to plant the popular and easy to grow vegetables and herbs that can be grown and enjoyed all summer long. Today, I'm planting cucumbers, eggplant, okra, peppers, squash, tomatoes, both determinate and indeterminate, and zucchini. Popular herbs that I'm going to plant are basil, dill, oregano, rosemary, sage, and thyme. But before we get started with the fun stuff, there are a few basic but critical things you need to know. First of all, what planting zone are we in? This class is appropriate for most of the United States, but all of Georgia is in zone 7 to 8. If you're outside this area, please consult your county extension agent. They say from this map that the last frost date is officially March 25th in North Fulton, but I'd like to wait until April 15th. That way I'm not surprised by a late frost in the beginning of April. Also, you can get your crops in and make sure that the soil is warm. Next, we need to do a soil test. This bag that I'm holding is a soil test bag. It measures the alkalinity or the acidity of your soil. Soil to be between 5.5 and 5.6. Soil tests determine the effectiveness of fertilizer. North Georgia soils tend to be very acidy. So, in order to collect your samples, you want to dig 8 to 12 small samples in the bed you want to test, 4 inches deep. I like to mix the samples together on a piece of white paper, at least 1.5 cups of soil, and then I send it to the county extension office. They take you may take your sample bag to any extension office. It's $12 a sample, payable by check, Visa, MasterCard, or money order. Or you can obtain a soil test kit for $15, which includes the container and a prepaid postage. The results will be mailed to you in about 2 weeks, and it will tell you your pH, the nutrients, and recommendations that you need to add. To raise the pH of soil, we spread dolomitic lime. Dolomitic lime is particularly great because it also contains the nutrients calcium and magnesium. And it does take 6 months for the soil to take full effect. So now we are going to look at my garden. And I'd like you to see, I have planted some of it, but we are going to plant the rest of it today. So if you will follow me, we will see my garden. Now, if you look at this first bed, you see I have a series of 4 raised beds. In my first bed, I have it split half and half. This half is my late spring garden. In it, I have Swiss chard, I have red and green romaine, I have some butter crunch lettuce, I have spinach, and I have some carrots. Oh my goodness, the carrots look like they're about ready to pull. And I have some little boys, and they are very tender. This one's a little early, but I will be pulling all of this out and planting the rest of my summer garden. So let's keep on going. And this is going to be the victory garden that we're going to plant today. And if you'll follow me down, I'll show you what I have in bed 1 and 2. In the first bed down here, I have tomatoes. I don't want too many because when they come in, they are prolific. In the first section of this bed, I have indeterminate tomatoes. That means that these tomatoes like to grow in a vine. They will produce as much as 20 feet in a season. And the nice thing about them is that they will continue to produce from around June till the first frost. In the back of the bed, I have Determinate tomatoes. Those tomatoes are more of a bush form. Not only do they form a bush, but they also tend to produce all their crop at one time. If you are the kind of person who likes to can, freeze, or give away, then Determinate tomatoes are the ones for you, because you can harvest all of them, and then the plant is spent. You can pull the plant out and replace it with another plant, whether tomato or not. It also is nice because this is succession planting, and that means that you will always have something coming in bloom. You may notice that I have these wonderful supports for my arbor. These are metal, but you can make them out of bamboo, wood, anything you may have. And you might also notice that I have my post in here, but then I have a piece of string tied from my plant all the way up to my first support. If this vine is going to grow 20 feet, I need to contain it along the way. So the front will be the long vines, and the back will be the front is indeterminate, back determinate. Why? Because you want your garden facing south, and the lower plants grow in the south will not shade the vines that are going to get to be 20 feet tall. In my next bed, I have beans and peas on this side. Half of them, 2 of them, I used a plant. And for the rest of the bed, I use seeds. And the seeds were planted a week ago, and they're already all up and ready to produce. You might notice that the support I use in this bed is a middle support with netting on both sides. That's because the beans like to crawl up, and I'm trying to get a vertical planting. And on this side, I have cucumbers. And look how they've already started coming all the way up the net. The cucumbers will then hang down and will be very easy to harvest. I've learned through years of practice to put my herbs in pots. When I used to put them in the garden, they would take over the vegetable garden. Although I said that, I do like to put my annual herbs, such as basil, in the bed because this will not grow too tall and the cucumbers will be growing behind it. So let's look at some of these pots with herbs in them. I have lavender, I have some late parsley, I have some sage, we have fennel, lovely rosemary, dill, we have chives here, we have tarragon, both French and Mexican, strawberries, mint, and please remember to put your mint in a pot so it doesn't take over your garden. And the reason I like to put my herbs in pots is this was last season's oregano, 4-inch pot. It took over the pot. I took it in, I put it in. And so you see that if you have a limited space in your garden, that you want to make the most of it. So if you'll follow me back up to my garden, we'll see how to plant today's garden. So as you see, we're coming over here and we are going to plant our garden. Wow, look at all this stuff. So what are we going to do today? Well, today I'd like to show you how I plan my garden. I always like to have a written map, or if I don't have a written map, I draw out the size of my garden. It's much easier to move plants around in the drawing or in a pot in my garden before I start to plant. Again, a southern exposure, and I like to group my tall plants on the northwest side. That's the way I can make sure that the sun comes across and that the south and the middle and the north will all get even sun. So what am I going to put in my garden? I am going to plant my victory garden, and I'm going to put the things I like to eat. So in the back on the north side, I have eggplant and several sweet and hot peppers. The reason I put them on the back side is they really don't develop until the middle of the summer and the end. So while they're growing and producing and getting ready to fruit, then my tomatoes will be growing like crazy. So I put my tomatoes in the middle, and then in the front, I have put my squash and zucchini. As a matter of fact, there's a little zucchini on that plant that I see right here. Maybe I can show you. Can you see that? It's a beautiful little zucchini plant. And if you take the flowers, you can actually, when they're open, fry them, eat them, and they're delicious. A little breading, a little cheese, and it is a taste sensation that you will not believe. So let's see, how do we plant our plants? Well, today I'm going to show you how to plant a tomato plant, which is the most unusual way of all the vegetables. And therefore, you need to know how to do it right. So the first pot here, let me remove this, is a determinate plant. And the reason I have a determinate plant is because I don't have large garden stakes in this bed. So the first thing I'm going to do is take it out of the pot, and I'm going to wiggle the roots because it's been in this pot all season long, and it wants to breathe. Now, tomatoes are the only vegetable that you want to take off about the bottom 2/3 of the plant's leaves so that they can get stronger by being planted deeper. And along this stem, where I'm taking off these leaves, roots will grow. And so all of these little areas will produce wonderful roots. Then I'm going to take my spade, dig a nice deep hole, deeper than the plant. And so if I want to plant it all the way up here, I'm going to have to really put it down deep. So that would be the way that I would start planting in the ground. Because it's a determinant, I can either use a post or I can use a wonderful tomato cage. So each plant after that is going to be planted at the pot level. So if I take this pepper, and oh, this is a Serrano pepper, love them. Again, very root bound, so wiggle the leaves, dig your hole. Now, I have amended my soil, but at the same time, a slow release fertilizer is never a bad idea. I can either use Osmocote or one of the blue fertilizers, and I simply take a few, sprinkle it in the hole, and then plant to the pot level. I want to be sure and keep my tags. My tags are what is going on with this plant. Tells you the amount of light it needs, the amount of spacing it needs, the amount of depth of planting that it needs, and how long it takes for maturity. So what I like to do is keep these. I happen to keep them in a little, I believe this was a baseball card holder. I can clip it into my 3-ring binder, and I will always have my tags at hand. Then in my vegetable garden, I make a simple tag with what it was, and I will be able to refer to my chart. So I go on, and on the outside, you notice I have planted herb. There's rosemary, oregano, parsley, tarragon, and many, many more. So my advice to you is to plant what your family likes to eat and plant at the right height, at the right space, and with the right things. So let's talk about what your plant really needs for a good growth. Let's talk about a garden's location. Your garden site is super important. Things that you might want to know are, and I'm going to answer a few of the 10 top questions that people have asked me in my garden. And the most important thing to consider is the sunlight. Do you have 8 hours of sun a day? That's what you need to grow a successful garden. Are you close to the house? If my vegetable garden is down in the back 40, I'll never go down there. So closer to the house, the better. Also, the soil. Do you have great amended soil with compost and the right nutrients? Did you do a soil test? Do you have all the nutrients in your soil from last year that you need? Make sure that you get the soil test. And last but not least on your garden's location, are you near water? You don't want to have to lug buckets of water to your garden, but you want to have a place nearby that you can plug in a hose. So how do we start our garden? I mentioned a minute ago that we need to make a plan and we need to select the right crops. But what are the right crops? Well, as I said before, the right crops are the ones that your family likes to eat. The size of your garden depends on what you and your family can grow. If you do large crops, you will be limited by the amount of other crops that you will be able to grow. For example, you don't want to grow corn in a 4x4 square. You want to put it on a hillside or in the back 40. Remember, corn, melons in a small garden will reduce the number of other vegetables you can plant. But remember to read the labels for planting space. Now, the labels on the back of the tags tell you exactly the planting space. But I have another technique that I've used, and that is square foot gardening. This book is by Mel Bartholomew. He lives in Connecticut, and he believes that we can use less work, less weeding, and less water by growing things in a square foot. So he takes this same 4x4 bed and he makes a grid of 1 square foot and a grid of 1 square foot the other way. He says that each vegetable needs a certain amount of space and that you can plant closely, then take out the crop when it is spent and put a new crop in. I've used his technique in the past and it's fabulous, but I find sometimes on a humid summer in Georgia, we tend to get a lot more fungus and mildew because the crops are so close together. So as I said, we need to make a written map. You need to choose the varieties of vegetables that your family likes to eat. And most importantly, take notes. If you had a successful eggplant season last year and you want to repeat it, what did you do? Where did you plant it? And likewise, if it wasn't so great, you might not want to repeat that. So, varieties. Numerous vegetable varieties are always available, and new and better ones are coming out all the time. But choosing the right variety for your situation can be so confusing. Stick with the proven recommended blue winners or things that are varieties for your major planting. Try the new varieties, but on a small scale to determine their worth for you and your family. Again, we're going to bring up soil testing, which is so important. Let me review it. The soil test results indicate the amount of residual fertilizer in your soil. Fertilizers and tells you the fertilizer you should obtain and add to get good plant growth. It also determines the pH of your soil, the basis for liming recommendations. Most vegetables grow best in a slightly acidic soil. The pH should be around 6 to 6.5. As I said, dolomitic lime is used to neutralize acidity, and the dolomite also supplies the magnesium and calcium, 2 nutrients that the plant often needs and are deficient in Georgia soils. A good time to apply this lime is in the fall. So let's talk a little about soil prep. As I said, we want to begin in the fall. Fall preparation will ensure proper soil conditions for early spring planting. Chop the residual litter from your fall garden and turn the soil over in burying all this leaf litter. It will aid in decomposition and help the soil add nutrients. Then we want to add organic matter. It improves the soil till, it conserves soil moisture, and it helps root development. Organic matter is then added to the decomposing other leaves and things because the decomposition and the heat will heat it up and you will add your nutrients. So what about fertilizer? Do I need fertilizer? Well, I'm afraid you do. The number on the bag refers to the percentage of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. I like to use a 10-10-10, a 6-12-12, or a 5-10-15 grade in my garden in general, rather than a specific fertilizer for each vegetable. These 3 grades give excellent results with most garden crops. The amount to use varies with the crop and the soil fertility. So what does this really mean? What are those three numbers? Well, Walter Reeves is a crazy guy, and we all know him, and he does a great fertilization memory um, thing. He tells us, if you've seen Saturday Night Live, the first number is everything at the top. The second number is everything at the bottom. And the third number is all around. So if you cannot remember what the three numbers are and what chemical it is, just remember up, down, and all around. So certain vegetables need certain amounts of fertilizer. For example, heavy feeders are things like celery and onions and lettuces. Most vegetables are medium feeders, and southern peas are light feeders. And now, do I have to plant on a schedule, or can I just throw them all into the ground? These are some of the most asked questions I get. And planting a garden is not a one-day job. You've already made a plan, so you know what you want to plant and when you want to plant it. Schedule each planting and then follow your schedule as closely as you possibly can. You want to plant tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, and okra after all danger of the first frost has passed. To prepare for summer vegetables, continue planting early maturing crops and harvest them. The planting chart handout that we sent you will help you have approximate appropriate dates. So now we need to discuss some of the things that are not fun in the garden, such as weed control, such as disease and insects. Well, weeds are not gardens' friends. They compete for moisture and fertilization and must be controlled by cultivating, mulching, or using herbicides. But herbicides are never a good idea in the home garden, and they're difficult to use and generally not recommended for the home gardener. So you need to check with your county extension agent for the amounts and when to use them. It's absolutely critical because too much might kill your plant and too little might do actually nothing. Accurate measurements and application is a must, but not usually available for your home garden. So I would suggest that you look at your garden, pull the weeds, and not use herbicides. The next thing that gardens tend to get a lot of are disease. Many foliage and soil-borne diseases, including nematodes, attack your vegetables and must be controlled or prevented in order to get good yields and high quality in your garden. Good horticultural practices should always produce stronger plants that tend to be less susceptible to disease and make the use of chemical controls less necessary. For example, I would avoid watering late in the day because wet foliage, it can often contribute to disease practices. So contact your extension agent if you have no idea. Next, we're going to talk about insect control and nematodes. Nematodes are the most numerous multicellular animals on Earth. A handful of soil could have thousands of parasites and of these microscopic worms. Many of them are parasites of insects, plants, or animals. From agricultural and horticultural perspective, there are two categories of nematodes. There are the predatory ones that will kill the garden pests, such as cutworms. And then there are pest nematodes like the root rot nematode, which attacks plants and spread viruses to harvest and other crops and other plants. So you want to take care of your plants, look for disease, look for insects and weeds. But then what about covering the plant? Mulch is a good idea. A mulch of straw, dried lawn clippings, leaves, or pine straw help conserve moisture, keep down weeds, and keep unstaked tomatoes, cucumbers, and bush squash fruit from coming in contact with the soil. To be effective, mulch should be about 2 to 4 inches deep after it has settled. But don't apply mulch in the garden too early in the spring before the soil has warmed up. Mulch will block the soil and the sunlight, and the soil will remain cool and retard early plant growth. Wait 2 to 4 weeks after planting to apply the mulch. Well, they say that soil needs to be between 65 and 75 degrees for proper germination. Otherwise, they will not germinate or they may retard the growth. So be sure that you give it space, let the soil warm up, and then apply your mulch. How much water do I need to add to my garden? Do I even need to water? Because Mother Nature does it for me. Well, how much water your garden needs will vary depending on your soil type, the stage of growth of your plant, and the amount of rainfall and temperature it is outside. But most vegetable gardens require about 1 to 1.5 inches of moisture per week during your growing season. Well, you've done a great job in your garden, and you've mulched and you've limed and you've prepared, and now we're ready to harvest our produce. Harvesting at the proper stage of maturity, not before or not after, most crops can be harvested several times if only the ready part is harvested. Harvest on time, such as okra, because if you don't pick it every 2 or 3 days, some pods will grow too big and become tough and unusable, a condition that could alter the future production. Harvest when they're ready. Do not harvest when the foliage is wet, but when it is dry. Tamping around on your vines will create spaces that disease can enter. So, in reviewing this wonderful garden, I want to come back to my victory garden that we planted and talk about some of the things that we just did. I showed you how to plant a tomato, how to plant some peppers and eggplant, but the important thing is that you give them enough space and that you plant the correct depth, and your garden will thrive. But not everybody has a vegetable garden. And you might live in a condo, or you might live in a apartment, or if you're living in a house, your sun just might not be anywhere but on your patio. So today, I thought I would help you so that you can have a wonderful pizza garden. So let's talk about, what do I need for my pizza garden? Well, plant what your family likes on their pizza. And of course, the most important thing is the tomato in the middle. So again, I'm going to select a determinate tomato because I don't want it to grow 20 feet. I'm going to wiggle the roots. And boy, this one has a lot of leaves at the bottom. So I can really get in here because remember, all the places that I'm taking the leaves off along the stem will produce fantastic, fantastic roots. So again, you want to put it in the center or the back, depending on if you have 3 or 2 sides, all the way down to where it's a third of the plant above. Now, what else am I going to put in my pizza garden? Well, this is where I have an opportunity to play with my herbs. My family likes basil. So I have a purple, red Reuben basil. I'm just going to set it in to see where I want them to be. And I'm going to pick a green sweet basil. And maybe I'll put it on the other side. Well, my family loves rosemary. So this rosemary comes in 2 forms. It can be upright or it can be prostrate. And I'm going to plant a prostrate one today because I want it spilling out in the pot. When I design a pot, I always have a thriller, a filler, and then a spiller. So this will become a spiller as well as oregano. You can't have a pizza without oregano. So I'm going to put it in the front and it in the back. That way, if I walk around my pot, I have 2 fillers, 2 spillers, and 1 thriller. So let's go ahead and plant the pizza pot. In, take it out, wiggle the roots. I have already added Osmocote to my garden pot, but I'm going to put a little bit more in there and then plant it at the correct depth. Same for this side. And you see some of the pots are very root bound. Keep the tag. Remember, we want to attach it so you know what you have. And this is Italian oregano. I also have some Greek oregano growing in my garden. And again, we're going to plant it. And I'll do the same thing with my rosemary. I'm going to plant it way back here and it will drape all the way over the side. Then I'm going to take some extra dirt because we planted deeply and fill the pot up where it needs it with good planting or potting soil. Lastly, I want to support it. So whether I use a cage or whether I use a post, it can support the tomato as it grows, and the basil will grow on the outside, and my 2 spillers will fall over the front. So I hope that this will solve some of your needs. If you live in a patio, you could have 1 pizza garden, 1 herb garden, and 1 who knows what. So I hope you will enjoy yourself, have fun, and plant what you want to eat. Go back. But before we get started and summarize what we learned today, let's talk about raised beds versus in-ground beds versus container beds. Because you see here, I use raised beds. I like raised beds because they are narrower. I only plant them 3 to 4 feet wide so that it eliminates the need for walking in rows in my garden. It also helps with compaction of soil. There's less compaction of the soil and the raised beds drain very well. But there are downsides to everything, and it dries out quicker when the weather's hot, and it does require more amended soil. But some of the most familiar or often asked questions about raised bed are, what kind of wood do I use? What are the amendments that I put in my raised bed? And can I put it on a slope? Do I need to fence it? Or do I still have to plant in rows? So let's answer some of these questions. I've used not pressure treated pine to build the frame of my vegetable garden. In the last decade, of course, they've taken out some of the pressure treated chemicals such as arsenic that were not recommended, but I'm old fashioned and tried and true. So I like to use unpressure treated. Then I use cedar on the outside of my beds. I raise it 1 level higher and I put my top row horizontally so that I can sit on it when I'm weeding, mulching, or harvesting my vegetables. So I recommend that would be great. We talked about the pots on your patio, and I would recommend that you have a fairly large pot. In the square foot gardening, it says that you need 1 square foot. So at least 1 square foot. I recommend you don't need a pot. You could use a 5-gallon paint container, and that's about the size the pot needs to be. It can be bigger, but if it's smaller, it tends to dry out pretty quickly. So let's review and see what we have talked about today for a successful garden. We want to locate it near the house in full sunlight. You want to make a plan and plant it carefully. You want to use recommended varieties after you've prepared your soil thoroughly, and you want to fertilize it according to the recommended schedule. Which reminds me, we want to plant on schedule. You need to control your weeds, your insect, and your diseases. Use a mulch, water thoroughly when dry and ready, and can freeze, store your produce for later use. I hope you've enjoyed today's class. We have on your screen the resources that I've used for today's class, and they're all available from North Fulton Extension Helpline. And we have many publications and circulars from Extension uga.edu/publications. So you can find pretty much of everything you're looking for in the resources. I hope you enjoyed this garden lecture series, Spring 2021. To view any of the previous classes, you can certainly visit the North Fulton Master Gardener YouTube channel. And if you want to see the other 9 after today, they are all available, all 10 lectures. You know, you can follow us on Twitter, North Fulton Master Gardener email sign up, LinkedIn, Instagram, the North Fulton Master Gardener webpage, or our YouTube channel. Join us in the fall for our fall lecture series and let us know that you'll be coming. Do we have any questions today?
Yes, ma'am, we certainly do. So I'm going to start off asking a few questions about soil testing. The first one, I sent a soil sample test on March 21st and have not heard back. Is this customary, or should I call to find out where it is?
Well, it usually takes about 2 weeks, so you're just at the end of that schedule. But if you're concerned, I would suggest to call them and see, where is it? I want to plant.
Okay.
It also comes by email. Next.
All right. I live in Southwest Atlanta. Where can I take my soil to be tested?
We have extension offices all over the city. There is one in South Georgia.
Okay. If you have a brand new raised bed with store-bought soil and mushroom compost, can you skip the soil test for the first year?
Yes, you can, because the store-bought come with all the nutrients in it.
Okay, great. All right, so there's several questions specifically about your garden. What type of wood did you use to make your bed frame?
I use cedar. Oh, to make the frame, I use 4x4 posts and on each corner, and then I can put them together.
Okay.
Untreated pine is what I use, posts.
Untreated pine, and you said that the size is 4x4. I heard that.
And also, if you do it 3 feet, it's just fine. The reason is a person of my size, 5 feet, needs to be able to reach the center without destroying the plants.
Right, and without throwing your back out, I'd imagine too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What did you fill your beds with?
So I do my own compost, and we put good soil. I have truckloads delivered. We amend the soil with my compost. I've added mushroom compost. I've had my soil tested. Occasionally, we have to add nutrients, but after having my soil tested a month ago, I found out we needed nothing. So we just put a little fertilizer and started planting.
Okay, excellent. And since we're talking about your garden, I think it would be great to see, we can see your garden right now is kind of bare and things are getting ready to grow. Why don't we take a look at what your garden looks like in full bloom?
I'd love that. Thank you.
And we'll keep asking questions while the video plays, but this will give the audience a chance to see what it looks like once it's really doing its stuff.
That would be great. And you notice that everything is spaced properly, and this is April. And let's see what it looks like in July. It has gone crazy. So this is why it's important to do the correct spacing, because they will overtake each other. Any other questions?
Yeah. What are the best tips for natural or organic pest and disease control?
Well, I am all organic garden here, and I like to control my pests by going out into the garden every night with a drink in hand and inspect my garden. It could be apple juice, it could be other things, and inspect. Look at the leaves, look at the underside, the other overside. You might notice that I have zinnias planted in my garden. These are flowers that are my first line of defense against disease and insects. If the insects are eating my zinnias, they're going to be in my vegetables next.
Mhm.
So I like to use organic techniques by cultivating and cleaning. And I use neem oil when I find disease. Neem oil is an insecticidal soap, but you can just as easily put Dawn in a spray bottle with water and go out and spray your plants when they do have disease. The downside of organic gardening is you need to apply it each time it rains because, again, it's soap and it washes off. But oftentimes the disease doesn't want to adhere to the soap, and neither do the bugs. So I also tend to find that certain vegetables get a lot of fungus, and squash and zucchini are really, really do it a lot. So I use a couple of other things, and this is a bonide product, which is also a safe product. There's safer and there's bonide as the manufacturers, but this is copper fungicide, and it is a dormant and growing season for blight on tomatoes and controls peach leaf curl, and it also helps with the fungus and mold. So I spray it when I see it, but again, because it's an organic product, I have to reapply more often.
Okay.
Next.
Aside from the big box places like Lowe's and Home Depot, etc., what are good local sources for mulch and compost and native plant species?
Well, we have lots of native plant species nurseries, and I like to wander around up in North Georgia or down south, but there are great little independent nurseries all over Georgia, and I tend to stay away from the big box stores because they just have the Bonnies and the tried and true. So if you're looking for something a little more unusual, you might go to one of them. Also, mail order is a wonderful source. I often cannot find certain things, and I'll go to mail order sources that are in the southern area, my southern area, because again, you want it to be the proper zone for planting. Which brings me to one more question somebody asked me, and that is, how do I keep the deer out of my garden? Because as you see, I live in the woods. I use a product called Repellent, and it will kill any of the animals. I'm sorry, will repel any of the animals that are pictures are listed below. It does not harm them. It's salt crystals. It comes in liquid, salt form, granules, and I spray it or put the salt crystals around my garden. And deer do not like to smell it, and they don't like to touch it with their hooves. Some sort of salt, and it's irritating, so they leave. And it lasts for 3 months. So I apply it at the beginning of my growing season and at the end, and they have to go elsewhere to find good things to eat.
Okay. I use that for my hostas as well.
Oh, good. Yeah, I'm sure. Keeps them all away. I think it has on here deer, raccoon, bunnies, squirrel, armadillo, birds, skunks, and a couple of other things. So if it's on the package now, you can get this at Ace Hardware. You can get it any of the manufacturers and the big box stores, but it's a great little product.
Okay.
Other questions?
Next question. Do you add crushed eggshells to the tomato plant soil regularly?
No, I don't, because I use the dolomitic lime and I use other nutrients, but it is okay to use them. And if you do, you need to apply it deep into the soil and allow the calcium to get in there. Remember, dolomitic lime is has calcium and magnesium in it, so it's not as necessary to add more.
Okay. How do you know when to harvest crops that grow underground like potatoes and carrots without just digging them up? Look at them.
So you might want to look at the first of all, your planting tag will tell you how many days to maturity. But the way I know it's ready is if you look at the ground level, when they're ready, the carrot will be crowning. You will see some of the carrot pushing through the ground, some of the potato pushing through the ground. So at that point, and it's been the appropriate days, you probably will have a yummy, fully mature carrot.
Okay, got it. Do you allow any plants to overwinter? And the example they're giving is oregano, rosemary, or other kind of greens. I guess that's really an annual versus perennial.
Yes. Okay, so herbs, and those are herbs, and they fall into two categories. One are evergreen and one are annuals. There are a few perennials that get less and come back, but usually they're evergreen or annual. So oregano, rosemary, thyme are all evergreen. I use them 12 months a year in my pots. Things like basil and dill are not. So each year I replant them. And as you see from my herb pots, all of them were from last summer. They all overwintered. My lavender, my chives, everything did really well. And I'll simply add my annual herbs to those pots.
All right. Can you repeat the name of the fungicide that you were just holding up?
Let's see. It is copper fungicide.
Awesome.
This one is liquid, ready to use, but you can get spray, concentrate if you have a bigger area.
Is that a bonide product?
This is a bonide product, and this one is also the Repellent is a bonide product. Okay. And a lot of the neem oil are safer, SAFER products. That's a brand name. And just look for it, because it's much better for you, the people eating your garden, from your garden, and you not to use chemicals that are dangerous.
Right. Do artichokes grow here in Georgia?
Well, that's a great question. You might see in the winter all these wonderful plants that look like artichokes. They're called cardoon. And we use them in Georgia as a thriller in our pots often. But I have seen artichokes growing here. It's just we don't have the California temperatures. Mm-hmm. And so they're more decorative than edible.
Okay. What variety of marigolds and zinnias do you use? And are they only planted on the perimeter of your gardens?
Well, any type will do, and it doesn't have to be marigolds or zinnias. Any type of flowering plant that will give you an indication of what is growing, what is going on in your garden. In California, for example, they'll put roses at the end of their grapevine rose, and that is used for the same thing. It's pretty, but it's really for the first line of detection of bugs, insects, and disease. So I don't have to put them on the edges, but by the time these zinnias have matured, they are huge. So I don't want it to take up too much room in my garden.
Okay. Since nematodes are too small to see, how do you know that you have a problem?
Well, if your plant is eaten off at the bottom and it's not a bunny, it's probably a nematode. Okay. They produce a lot of diseases that are like that. The root rot, the nematode twisted, they are predators. Now, on the other hand, there are nematodes that will attack cutworms, and they also like to gnaw things off at the base. But what I like to do with some of my plants, and some of the time I do this, is put a little paper cup as a hood in my garden so that the cutworms cannot cross over it and eat them. But that's a real pain in the neck if you have a big garden. So again, daily inspection is key.
Okay. Let's see. Can I use vermiculite, peat moss, and bag dirt for my soil mixture for my planters?
Sure you can, but most of the soil that you buy has that already in it. So if you're making your own, have at it. The vermiculite will help it stay aerated, but too much of it you don't want, because then it'll simply go, drain through. So I like to use either the big bags or have a truckload delivered, depending on the size of my garden that year, just so I know I have a perfect mixture of ingredients.
Okay. Any way to prevent the hammerhead planarians that are starting to spread?
Gee, I don't know about that one. I'll have to check into that.
Yeah. Any suggestions to keep ants off of fruit trees?
They love fruit trees. You just have to fight with the ants, and you have the upper part and they can have the bottom. You know, they talk about putting out little trays of water so that the ants will fall into them and die when they're trying to get to the plants. So there are a lot of old wives' tales, but I wouldn't want to give you the wrong one.
Okay. My addition of compost to my amended soil is growing a vegetable vine of some sort. Do I just weed? Do I weed it out?
If you like, you might want to see what it is. Often in my compost bin, I have little tomatoes growing, or some of the summer vegetables that I've discarded. And sometimes those volunteers are really kind of interesting. So that's up to you. I've also pulled them out of the bed and put them in a pot so that it's not going to compete with what I planted. And then I'll know what it is soon enough.
Gotcha. Is there any resource that you recommend for a beginning gardener?
Well, on the resource page that we've listed before, you'll see that there are resources for everyone. But if you will go online and put in resources for beginning gardeners, you will see pages and pages of resources.
Okay.
I'd like to recommend the University of Georgia ones, because these are tried and true and scientifically proven, but there certainly are many others out there. But if you will go on the University of Georgia website, you will see that it'll answer just about any question you have.
Okay, and we also put some
others?
We also, just a few more. Just to let everyone know, we also put the resources into the chat. Multiple requests to repeat the deer repellent name brand again.
Okay, and there are others, but I wanted you to see, this is a Bonide product. It's called Repelzol, and it's an animal repellent ready to use. It prevents grazing, nibbling, chewing, gnawing, and browsing damage to plants and property. It's environmentally safe and biodegradable. It will not harm the plants or animals. So again, organic and easy to apply. I do this around my vegetable garden, but around the perimeter, I do the salt granules. Same product, just different form.
Gotcha. 2 more questions. I have small deep holes. I have small deep holes in my raised garden bed soil. Are those from squirrels? And how do I prevent it?
It might be moles. It could be voles, chipmunks. It could be any little animal. And there are many different deterrents. Most of them don't work. You just have to scare them. Some people put steel wool in the holes to prevent the animals from going in. If it's a squirrel, they're going to dig it up, and then hopefully that'll be the end of that. I know some people have squirrel problems taking one bite of their tomato and throwing it down. That's a problem that involves fencing. So somebody had asked, do I like to fence my garden? The reality is if you have persistent animal pests, you might want to consider it. But you need to be sure that you do a fence high enough that deer can't jump over it. I also like to put a barrier down low, because all kinds of pests come under, such as moles, voles, squirrels, chipmunks, so that if you are building a fence, build a fence. Now, how do I prevent the squirrel from taking a bite and throwing it down, I usually, if I had that problem, would put a net around it, similar to the net that I have for my cucumbers and beans. So I have seen gardens that you actually have to open the net door to walk in that are covered. And guess what? Nobody bothers it. So it may take that, it may just take repels all. You'll have to see who wants to eat your garden.
All right. And we did have a class on wildlife and critters that folks can go back to on YouTube, on the YouTube channel and at our website. So the very last question is someone who is looking specifically for chives, and do you have any recommendations on where they can find some?
Gee, they're everywhere. You could plant them by seed. You could buy a little plant. You could get it at a big box store. You can get it at a nursery. And chives these chives I have down here are the second year. They're beautifully flowering now, and we use them constantly. But oftentimes, a lot of these herbs and vegetables will take a season to really come into fruition. So I hope you find them and enjoy them as I have. Was that the last question for today, Mary?
That is the last question.
Well, I want to thank everybody for joining us today on Zoom and Facebook Live. And we hope you'll join us for our Fall 2021 Gardening Lecture Series. Don't forget, follow us on our social media and sign up for our newsletter to learn more about upcoming classes and activities from the North Fulton Master Gardeners. Happy gardening!